Vamos dar início a esta sessão da tarde. Muito obrigada. Queria começar por agradecer à professora doutora Patrícia Deegan por ter aceitado o nosso convite para participar nesta conferência. É uma honra poder apresentá-la. Patrícia Deegan é doutorada em Psicologia Clínica pela Duquesne University, espero ter pronunciado bem. É a diretora da Pat Deegan and Associates. Patrícia Deegan é uma ativista do movimento pelos direitos das pessoas com experiência de doença mental e viveu o seu próprio percurso de recovery após ter sido diagnosticada com esquizofrenia quando adolescente. Ao longo de mais de 30 anos, Patrícia Deegan tem sido uma líder com um pensamento profundamente inovador, divergente e, segundo as suas próprias palavras, disruptivo no campo da saúde mental. Os seus trabalhos e artigos foram fundamentais para a conceptualização do recovery, para o entendimento do conceito na perspectiva da experiência vivida e para a sua generalização. Em 1999, em Portugal, tivemos a Patrícia Deegan em Lisboa, numa conferência na Fundação Carlos de Gulbenkian, onde apresentou uma palestra que foi muito marcante para todos nós, sobre o recovery como uma viagem do coração. Lembrarmos todos dessa apresentação e foi um momento de viragem também para nós, no nosso trabalho. Patrícia Deegan fundou uma empresa que é dirigida por e para pessoas em recovery. A missão dessa é salvaguardar a dignidade humana e assegurar que a voz, a escolha e a decisão de cada pessoa é respeitada em termos dos seus cuidados de saúde. Com esse propósito, desenvolveu um programa que se chama Common Ground, que inclui uma aplicação informática, uma aplicação já premiada e que ajuda as pessoas com experiência de doença mental a identificar as suas preferências ao nível do tratamento, a comunicá-las de forma eficaz aos seus médicos, com vista a uma decisão compartilhada. Tem também uma biblioteca online com vários recursos e ferramentas sobre o recovery, uma academia Common Ground para concursos e consultoria para pares e profissionais e uma aplicação Hearing Distressing Voices Simulation, no fundo uma aplicação para que profissionais, estudantes e outras pessoas possam entender os desafios e a experiência das pessoas que ouvem vozes. Desde 2009, que a Patrícia Deegan trabalha como consultora, ajudando a desenvolver um modelo On-Track NI, utilizado por equipas especializadas na intervenção com jovens com os primeiros sinais de psicose. Patrícia Deegan tem recebido vários prémios académicos, é autora de várias publicações e tem transmitido uma mensagem de esperança de recovery a muitas pessoas em todo o mundo. A sua comunicação hoje intitula-se Como é o seu rugido? Uma reflexão sobre a dignidade humana e a luta pela justiça. Quando ouvi este título, lembrei-me de uma frase de um romance de um escritor moçambicano Miyakoto, em que ele começa o seu livro a dizer: até que os leões contem as suas próprias histórias, os caçadores serão sempre os heróis das narrativas de caça. E, no fundo, esta frase remete-nos muito para a importância das próprias pessoas de poderem, pelas suas próprias palavras, descreverem as suas experiências, expressarem as suas ideias, contestar as narrativas culturais dominantes e defenderem os seus direitos de participação plena na comunidade. E, portanto, vamos ouvir o seu rugido, Patrícia Deegan, hoje, com muito agrado. Obrigada.
Well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to take a really deep breath. I'm really excited to be here with you all today. I can't believe it was 1999 that I was in Lisbon with you folks. And it seems like yesterday in some ways. So thank you for a beautiful introduction. But I'm also very honored that you folks have invited me to return and let me take a moment and get my slide up. You know, just before we get started, let's just remember what we have been through this past year, what our entire world, our entire planet has endured in this past year. It's been an extraordinary year. And, but I think what really strikes me is that the community of service users, the community of those of us who've been diagnosed with a mental illness and who have used mental health services, have not only survived as a community of a worldwide community of people during this pandemic, but that we have also thrived as a community, that we have not just sort of succumbed, but rather we found new and really innovative ways of being together, of connecting with one another. We all learned a lot about televisits and telehealth and reaching out to our peers via Zoom and video conferencing. We learned a lot about how to connect with people and, you know, play some video games together just to have that human connection. And I think that I saw so many acts of courage where our peer community, where our community of service users were reaching out to some of our most vulnerable members. In particular, here in the United States, it were people that were without homes, you know, and that the peer community continued to go out and to support people in getting food and in getting entitlements and in making sure that people had masks and had human contact. And it took a lot of courage because many of us were putting ourselves on the line going out there during a global pandemic and performing these services for our peers. And I want to thank you, one and all, for our work during this time. We did not abandon our people. We stuck together, we pivoted, we innovated, and here we are today, right? And we are resilient people. And I think mental health systems forget this about us. They forget that we are resilient. This word resilience is interesting. This word resilience, what comes to my mind are those gorgeous ancient Viking ships, right? You remember them with the beautiful hulls, you know, that come down. And resilience works like a Viking ship in some ways. Here comes a wave of a pandemic and we all tipped, but then we self-righted. That's resilience. In mental health, we may experience a mental health challenge, and for a little bit, we may be tipping. Whoa, but we're able to self-right. That this capacity for self-healing, this capacity for supporting one another does not end just because we receive a psychiatric diagnosis. And this, above all, needs to be remembered in our field, that the people we work with are not the problem. Rather, they're part of the solution. So on that note, today I want to talk to you about roaring, about discovering and putting our roar to work. So I'm going to share my screen and get started. Okay. How do you roar? A reflection on human dignity and our struggle for justice. So this word dignity is extremely important, and understanding human dignity is a key to organizing our communities to have a voice and a choice in mental health services and in terms of our presence and advocacy within our governments. And so what is this thing we call dignity? So in preparing for this talk, I've done a lot of thinking about what dignity is and what it is not. Now, the dictionary tells us that dignity is about worth and about value. But it's not the worth and the value that we associate with having, say, a lot of money or a very fancy car or a lot of fame and prestige. Those are things that some people value, but that's not what dignity is about. These are not dignity. Instead, our dignity is rooted in our very being and our capacity to become, to be and to become. We have dignity as human beings precisely because I am, you are, that being itself is of value. And importantly, dignity is not earned. Dignity is not something that we earn. Dignity is, if you will, our birthright. Dignity, human dignity, is our birthright. And dignity is also about becoming. Dignity is about the freedom to become and to fulfill our human potential. So dignity ultimately is about the freedom to become who our potential is, what our potential is. It's the freedom to be and become who we incurably are. Dignity is about the freedom to become incurably, unapologetically who we are and are meant to be. And those of us diagnosed with mental illness, we do not have to earn dignity. Okay? So think for a minute about your experience. When we experience our dignity being affirmed, you know, when does this happen, right? When and how does the affirmation of human dignity happen? And some of the most important ways I think dignity is experienced is we experience our dignity when we feel seen and when we feel heard. And ask yourself, in mental health services in Portugal, do I feel seen? Do I feel heard? Is my dignity being honored in this way? We experience our dignity when we feel understood. Okay? Not that someone simply heard, okay, I heard what you said. No, when I feel understood. Do people using services, mental health services in Portugal, feel understood by service systems? We experience our dignity when our work and our contributions are valued, when we can not just receive, but when we can give back our talents, our gifts to our community. Do service users in Portugal have the opportunity to work and to contribute to the greater good of the community? When we experience our dignity, we feel physically and emotionally safe. Living in unsafe places, living in places where there is emotional or physical violence, where the threat, where the fear of this is present, is not a dignified way to live. We experience our own dignity when we live in a dignified place. A homeless shelter is not a dignified home. We experience our dignity when we feel empowered to take action on a personal level to improve our situation. Oppression is the flip side of this, when we feel powerless to change what is pushing us down. Empowerment is dignified because I can take action. I'm not just a pawn in the game. I have the power to take action to improve my situation. We experience our dignity when we can explore our human potential, our hopes, our dreams, where there's a pathway into the life I want for myself. Do mental health services in Portugal help individuals explore their human potential and their native resilience? And importantly, we feel that our dignity is affirmed when our culture and our heritage is recognized and honored. And of course, here in the United States, Black Lives Matter, systemic racism, a horrifying history of enslaving human beings. Very big part of raising up the dignity of people of color in our country here in the United States. All right. So today, what I want to do is to tell you three stories about dignity and how dignity gets wounded and how wounded dignity becomes like rocket fuel, okay, that can ignite a social movement for justice. And knowing this connection between dignity, right, and the power of rocket fuel that comes when dignity is wounded is a key to organizing our community for justice. So the very first story I want to tell is a story about a friend of mine named Charlie. And this is a story about what I call embodied dignity. It's the dignity that goes with being a human body, right? So my friend Charlie was a teenager when he dove off a beach wall and broke his spine. And he became quadriplegic, unable to move his arms or his legs, right? And one time he shared a story with me. He said he was in rehabilitation services and living at the rehabilitation center. And he was in traction in rehabilitation treatment so he was immobilized. He couldn't move. And he was under a white sheet in the rehabilitation hospital. And the resident, the attending physician, arrived, followed by students, a whole group of students. And they came into Charlie's hospital room. And after chatting and talking with Charlie a little bit, the attending doctor proceeded to rip the white sheet off of Charlie's body and expose his naked body for all these students to look at. I want you to feel what's going on with your body as I tell you this story, because I don't know about you, but inside my body, even to this day, when I hear this story of Charlie being treated in this profoundly undignified manner, when I hear this story of Charlie's bodily dignity being violated, something in me begins to rise up in my body, right? So pay attention to that. What happened to Charlie, he felt it too. And he began to scream and scream in protest. The next thing that happened is that nurses arrived with tranquilizing medicine to shut him up. And of course, once they tranquilized him, there was no more screaming, right? This scream, this primal way of protesting the violation of bodily dignity, is going to run through all of the stories that I'm going to tell you today. And another theme that will run through this story and the others is this idea of the medical gaze, okay? That stony, cold look of the doctor as he removes that sheet with authority, right? That gaze that subjugates Charlie and ultimately humiliates Charlie, right? And it left Charlie experiencing himself not as a human being, but as a specimen, a medical specimen being shown to the students. And so Charlie screamed. But I'll tell you something, that scream is a universal language of dignity expressing itself, asserting itself. It's a protest, it's a rage, it's an agony, it's a voice, and it's the cry for dignity that rises up when dignity has been violated. And the powerful news is that that solitary scream in that rehabilitation hospital on that day can and does begin to resonate with the solitary cries and screams of dignity violated for all people. And when the collective scream emerges, it's a roar. And Charlie's scream merged with the screams of millions of other people in the United States who have disabilities, and their screams became a roar, and they knew what they wanted. That just because I have a physical disability, it does not mean I am an object to be acted on. I am a fully human being. I want the dignity of going to work. I want the dignity to be able to vote. I want to be able to educate myself. I want to be able to achieve my human potential. I want to demedicalize my life, people with disabilities were saying, so I can lead a life that is similar to others. So this idea that an individual cry, an individual protest can, when it joins with others, become a collective roar. Another important thing is that when this cry emerges, when dignity is violated, it reveals a gap, a hole, a space between what is and what should be. What is that Charlie's dignity was wounded. What should be is that human bodily dignity should be reverenced and honored in all medical settings. That's what should be, but that's not what happened. So when our dignity arises up as a cry, an individual cry, what it's doing is it's showing us, it's signifying a gap between what is and what should be. In that way, our individual cry is a signifier. It's a teacher. It's teaching us what needs to happen to make it right. A second story. This is John Thomas Percival. Some of you may know John Thomas Percival. And John Thomas Percival spent quite a bit of time locked up in restraints in a British asylum. And so this story is about the dignity of place. What does this place where this individual is chained, what does it say about the value and worth of this individual? How the culture in Great Britain at the time honored or failed to honor this human being, right? After he served in the military, John Percival was committed to do 2 different private asylums in the UK and England between 1831 and 1834. And he actually spent 8 months in restraints like the one you see here. And when he got out of the asylum, out of the madhouse, Percival published 2 books describing his passage through madness and the horrors of the treatment he received. And in his books, we can to this day hear John Thomas Percival roar, right? Here's what he said. I reflected on how many were in the same predicament as myself. And I said, who shall speak for them if I do not? Who shall plead for them if I remain silent? How can I betray them and myself too by subscribing to the subtle villainy, cruelty, and tyranny of the doctors of the asylum? John Percival got out of the asylum, out of the madhouse, wrote his book, and his individual cry became a roar when it joined with others. And together, they formed the alleged Lunatics Friend Society. And I just love it that they call themselves alleged lunatics, right? That organization was established in 1845 and had up to 60 members, right? And this is an actual poster saying that they were using the method of a public lecture to go after some of the lunacy laws, which were so oppressive. And you can hear his roar when he says this gross outrage and injustice, right? So we're not the only ones, right? This roar has been roaring for some time. And once again, when dignity is violated, it reveals a vision of what has to happen to close this gap, right? And so Percival saw the injustice of the madhouse system in the UK. That's what is. And he had a vision of what should be, born through the agony and the wounding of his very own dignity. He began to develop a roar and a vision for how to close the gap. A third story. This is my story. This is a third story about dignity. And this is the dignity, the violation of the dignity of self, the right to be and to become. So some of you know at 17, I was diagnosed with schizophrenia. I was in a psych hospital. I was told that someone with schizophrenia could never be well. I was told to take high-dose antipsychotic medications for the rest of my life. And I was also at discharge told that I needed to avoid stress. Life is stressful, guys. And boredom is even more stressful, right? But I was basically told to retire from life. And in essence, what they were telling me was that I would be, that my future was already known. That I was a schizophrenic, not that I had schizophrenia, but that I was a schizophrenic. That was profoundly dehumanizing for me. And essentially in that moment, I was robbed of my right to be Pat Deegan, incurably, fabulously Pat Deegan. That's who I am. I am not a schizophrenic. I never have been a schizophrenic. I'm a person, not an illness. And that's a violation of my dignity to say that I will always be ill and that I have no future, that I have no opportunity to achieve my human potential. That's a violation of dignity. And this was done to me in the name of help. But I say back, help is not help if it hurts. My roar gradually awakened. And this is true. At first, this was what my roar was. I'm going to become Dr. Deegan, and I'm going to change the mental health system so no one ever gets hurt in it again. And in those early days, I thought that I single-handedly could do that job. And I figured the way to do it is to become one of them so that I could get inside the system and change it. And that's the beauty of being 18, 19, 20 years old. You can think those big thoughts. What I learned over time is it would take all of us together to change. And I'm still out there roaring. Here's me in Israel in 2019, carrying my roar to the world. I am a person, not an illness. I am a person, not an illness. Right? And once again, the violation of my dignity revealed a gap. When our dignity is violated, it reveals a vision of what must happen to close the gap. And from that vision, we're called to lead. A single roar is not going to change the mental health system. That I learned. Together, collectively, we can. And that we can because we have a vision of what should be. We can lead one another towards justice. So these are the most important questions, I believe, in organizing a community of people around an issue for social justice. How in your life has dignity been affirmed? How has your dignity been violated, in particular in mental health services? What is the gap you perceive between what is and what should be? What's your vision of what should be? How do you roar? What are the words of your roar? And then how can you awaken that roar in others? Because it's there. So when I ask service users in various talks, how do you roar? How do you roar? One person said, I roar like a waterfall, slowly, powerfully, consistently, etching hope for recovery into mental health services. That's the gift this individual bears. How do you roar? Another person said, I roar like a hiker, persistently putting one foot in front of the other, often over challenging heights and through stormy weather, supporting others I meet on the journey of recovery. Another person said, I roar like a hammer, hitting a nail, powerful, yet precise, knowing that if I keep at it, I can drive the nail to help build a stronger structure, right? And then what are the words to your roar? These are the most precious words we have, I believe, the words of our roar. So I don't dare to speak your roar, the words to your roar, but I will share some of my words. Help should not hurt. Help should be helpful. Help can only be helpful if I am included in co-creating what is help. Help is co-created between myself and another person. Another one of my roars, I am a person, not an illness. Illnesses do not recover. Only people recover. My roar. I want a voice and a choice in mental health services. And even more specifically, my roar is all about psychiatric medications, is all about having a voice and a choice with regards to psychiatric medications. And I'm really excited to tell you that the work that I did over the pandemic was focused on a new approach that I'm calling medication empowerment. And it's a way to help people develop that voice and the choice with regards to medications. But that's another talk for another day. So where I'd like to end now and open things up both to questions. I'm very interested in your questions. I'm very open to hearing your comments, but I'd also like to hear, how do you roar? How do you roar? And what are the words of your roar? Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now. And I am going to listen to the Portuguese interpretation. You can put your thoughts and answers and stuff in the chat, right?
Enquanto vamos aguardando, portanto, todas as pessoas que quiserem partilhar as suas reflexões, seus comentários e questões, podem colocar no bate-papo. Entretanto, vamos partilhar com a Patrícia Deegan uma questão que já nos tinha chegado para ser colocada a ela, que tem a ver com os internamentos compulsivos. Há uma questão relativamente a um prazo máximo dos internamentos compulsivos. Se acha que a lei devia incluir um prazo máximo e se sim, qual devia ser? Obrigada. Entretanto, vamos recolhendo mais questões.
Thank you for your question. So my understanding of the question is, do I think that there should be a mandatory limit on the amount of time that people can be detained in a psychiatric hospital? And my absolute unequivocal answer is yes. Yes, that psychiatric hospitals are there to help, not to hurt, and that individuals have basic human rights within the government and the right to go about freely or be subjected to the full process of the law. And it's a dangerous thing for a government to be able to detain people indefinitely on the basis of a so-called mental disorder, because then it's too easy for the government to put away unwanted people, unruly people, people with wrong politics, right? So we need to be very careful not to do that and to make sure that there is a limit.
Ok. Temos recebido alguns significados de rugido de algumas pessoas. Uma pessoa disse: o meu internamento compulsivo foi para me obrigar a tomar a medicação psiquiátrica. Esse foi o rugido de uma pessoa. Outra pessoa disse que o seu rugido é liberdade e saúde. Outra pessoa disse que acha impressionante o seu testemunho e que pergunta como está a criar este movimento.
So I'm not sure which movement exactly you're referring to, the movement for social justice?
A pessoa aqui referiu o movimento de exigência e demanda.
Social justice.
Demanda, fui o que está no bate-papo.
Yes, this movement for social justice, right?
Sim, social justice, yes.
So the message I wanted to bring to you today is that as we organize our community toward a vision of social justice within mental health services, one way to begin to bring people into the movement, into our movement, is to help them discover their roar. What were the times, those questions I put out, what were the times when you experienced being treated with dignity? What were the times when you experienced in mental health that your dignity was violated? What's the gap you see between what is and what should be, right? How do you roar? What are the words to your roar? These questions become very powerful ways of helping people mobilize themselves toward the movement. And by listening closely as an organization, we can want to hear what are people roar, what are their roars? And we want to harness that roar, right? But we also want to listen to what's the gap they see between what is and what should be. We want to listen for that too, because what they're doing when we help people articulate that, they are starting to have a vision of what they want. It's one thing to call it social justice. It's another whole other thing to agree on what that means. So by asking these questions of our members in the organization and asking as we recruit new members of our organization for social justice, what's the gap you see between what is and what should be? It helps us aim our efforts at what's important to our members, right?
Vou ler outro comentário. Boa tarde, nós pessoas com experiência de doença mental queremos, em caso de necessidade, utilizar os serviços de psiquiatria, nomeadamente internamentos, nos hospitais gerais e não em hospitais psiquiátricos. Somos pelo encerramento dos hospitais psiquiátricos. No caso do internamento em alguém que esteja mais instável, como poderemos preservar os seus direitos?
Thank you for the question. I think that in order to preserve our rights, I mean, that's exactly what John Thomas Percival that I spoke of earlier was trying to do. He was trying to say, I have the right to send and receive mail. I have the right to have visitors. I have the right to have a say over my environment here at the hospital. And so, yeah, I think it's a matter of organizing and working both through trying to get policy changed and to try to, I mean, state hospitals, at least here in the United States, you know, they used to be a really big business. Towns and people counted on the state asylums in order to have jobs and stuff. But all they were ultimately was human warehousing. And human warehousing is not dignified. It's wrong. So I think people need to be encouraged to put pressure on the organizations that run the hospital to acknowledge and to uphold basic human rights in those places. And I agree that the larger the place is, the more likely it is to be oppressive and become just a human warehouse. And we also have other very powerful models for how care can occur. And I think immediately of Soteria House and the idea that it's possible to, you know, make these passages through mental health challenges without having to be humiliated and hurt. So there are models out there that we actually know work. There are also models that help us divert people away from psychiatric hospitals. And peer support can be a huge part of what we call here in the States hospital diversion, keeping people out of hospitals in the first place.
Ok, temos muitas questões, vamos selecionar algumas e iremos depois fazer chegar a professora Patrícia Deegan mais as restantes. Portanto, temos aqui como se pode diminuir o fosso que existe quando a dignidade da pessoa é violada e quando é obrigada a tomar a medicação contra a sua vontade.
Thank you for that important question. That's very much part of the vision I have, is that there is a way to begin to close the gap when it comes to psychiatric medications. When psychiatric medications are used to subdue our personhood, to shut us up, when we are on heavy, heavy doses of these drugs, when these drugs are causing us to have unlivable health issues and unwanted effects from them, that's the wrong use of medication. My vision is that with the proper tools, you and I and our peers can become empowered to have a voice and a choice in our treatment. And that's what I've really been working hard on for many, many years, you know, well over 30 years as I've been working on that. Because I think that medications for many people can be helpful. I don't have anything against psychiatric medications per se. The problem that I'm trying to address is that it's very difficult for us to have a voice and a choice and a say over medications when we're working with a psychiatrist who thinks we're crazy and just medicate them. And that's a violation of human dignity on a massive scale. So basically, I mean, I'm going to say this in a general way, is I think one way, organizing is a very important way and working for human rights is a very important way, but what I'm really good at is creating tools that disrupt traditional practice like over-medicating people. I believe in building tools that people can use that amplifies their voice and makes it easier for the psychiatric care provider, for the psychiatrist, the nurse, to hear the individual. And so, you know, along that way, I've created software programs that are used here in the United States in some places and many other things. Part of this all, I think, is bringing about change is saying to ourselves, well, I can't do everything. I'm just not a great, personally, not a great community organizer. Other people are, you know, and I support community organizing and rights-oriented work, but it's not my strength. My strength as a person, as an individual, is building tools that disrupt and transform everyday practices in mental health. Because when you use these tools, people get empowered to do things differently. So they're carefully crafted tools. So that's the way I work. That's my vision of bringing about change, but it's not the only one. There are many, many other visions. For instance, one of the things that I talk about is something that I call personal medicine. And personal medicine are the things we do to be well. Personal medicine is non-pharmaceutical self-care strategies, not that I read about on the internet, not that my doctor tells me to do, not coping strategies, because those are generic. Personal medicine is what I do. And I discover it because within me, there's a healer, because within me, there are answers. I don't always have to look outside to other people and to professionals and to therapists to tell me what can work for me. Within me, I can discover that as well, right? So what I'm doing is I'm raising up personal medicine, the things we do to be well, to the same status as pill medicine. And I'm saying that for many of us, the pathway into the life we want is by finding the right balance between what I do and any medicine I may take. That's the pathway for many of us into the life that we want. So that would be an example of a tool. We've got certified personal medicine coaches from Sweden and from the UK and from South Korea and Australia. I mean, we've got hundreds of them now. If you want to know more, you can come to my website, patdeegan.com, and learn more about personal medicine coaching and how we roll that out in different countries. But that would be one example of building a tool that you can use to help people discover, oh, I don't always have to look to the mental health system for the answers. There are answers within me too. That's just an example of how I roar.
Ok, mais uma questão. Entendo e concordo com a violência da imposição de qualquer tratamento. Mas o que pode alguma família fazer quando vê alguém da sua família desorganizar-se e recusar qualquer tipo de ajuda?
Well, it's a very important question, how families can support people who are experiencing a mental health challenge. And I'll be honest with you, in order to address the question, I feel like I would need to do a different lecture because I do talk to families often about things that we can do that support people. I think that families can play an important role in helping individuals advocate when it's difficult to advocate for ourselves, in order to get real help and in order to get help that doesn't hurt. I think that many times families have to be like a bear and be able to roar and to say, no, this is a person, not an illness. This is my son or my daughter, my loved one. And I'm here to defend their right to have treatment. And so I feel like it's a whole other lecture. I'm sorry, I can't just summarize it.
Ok, obrigada. Chegaram mais questões temos nota, temos registrado todas as questões e iremos fazer chegar aqui a professora Deegan. Portanto, muito obrigada a todas as intervenções, as questões e a todas as pessoas que assistiram. E muito obrigada a Patrícia Deegan pela sua excelente presença.
Thank you, Pat. I see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you all very much. It was an honor to be here.